Burkina Faso, a West African nation that most folks barely mention in global conversations, has suddenly stepped onto the world stage with a loud, bold statement that nobody saw coming. This isn't some minor progress update. Nah, this is a whole plot twist. Out of a country people often underestimate. A wave of breakthroughs just dropped. Breakthroughs so serious that even developed nations are raising their eyebrows like, hold up, they did what? In just a short period, Burkina Faso unveiled a saltwater to freshwater purification system built to answer the Sahel's brutal water shortages. And get this, it works on ridiculously low energy, turning salty or brackish water into clean drinking water. Families in remote villages who once prayed for reliable water sources now watch crystal clear water flow from locally made systems. That's not a small deal. That's life-changing stuff. But they didn't stop there. The country rolled out Africa's first ever military-grade electric truck, designed and assembled by local engineers, not imported, not licensed, not inspired by someone else's design. This beast moves silently, climbs rugged terrain, and runs on zero emissions. It's not just for show. It's a big tactical advantage in regions where you can't waste fuel. Noise attracts danger, and logistics are tight. This isn't Tesla. This is Burkina Faso saying, we can build our own stuff. Thank you very much. And if that wasn't enough, here comes the knockout punch. Homegrown agricultural drones programmed to plant seeds, inspect soil moisture, and monitor fields in real time. These aren't copy-paste toy drones. They're purpose-built for African land, rough soil, unpredictable weather, smallholder farms, and long hours under the sun. Local farmers call them eyes in the sky, and for good reason. These drones save labor, boost yields, and help farmers make smarter decisions. That's a big deal for food security. Here's the crazy part. None of these innovations came from foreign aid or billion-dollar corporate partnerships. No fancy Western labs. No Silicon Valley innovation hubs. These were built by Burkina Faso engineers, soldiers, students, and innovators powered by grit, creativity, and necessity. President Ibrahim Traore's leadership flipped the script. Instead of waiting for the world to hand out resources, Burkina Faso decided to build its own future with whatever it already had. For decades, Africa has been boxed into the narrative that high-tech stuff must be imported, borrowed, or donated. People act like innovation is a Northern Hemisphere privilege. Burkina Faso basically walked up to that idea and said, "Nah man, miss us with that nonsense." But guess what? When this news hit international circles, the reaction wasn't applause. Nope. It was confusion, shock, quiet whispers. Western outlets that love covering African crises barely said a word about massive African breakthroughs. It's almost like they didn't know how to process a success story that didn't involve foreign saviors. Meanwhile, across Africa, people were celebrating. From Ghana to Mali to Uganda, young engineers were sharing images of the electric truck asking, "Why can't we build this too?" Social media was buzzing with pride. This wasn't just innovation, it was liberation. But trust me, this story gets even crazier when you learn how Burkina Faso built all this without money, factories, or external help. You're not ready for what happened next. While most of the world was busy arguing in boardrooms about the future of electric vehicles and lining up billion-dollar factories, something completely wild was happening in Burkina Faso, a country with no flashy car industry, no mega industrial zones, and definitely no seat at the G20 dinner table. Yet somehow, this small nation pulled off what even richer countries still struggle to get right. It didn't start with money. Nope. Money was the last thing they had. What they did have was a whole lot of grit, frustration, creativity, and that "we are tired of waiting" attitude. Under President Ibrahim Traore, Burkina Faso ditched the old habit of begging for foreign grants and chasing temporary fixes from outside experts. Instead, they tapped into something way more powerful: their own people. Trore's administration rallied universities, technical schools, army mechanics, village innovators, and even small-town welders into one mission: create African solutions for African problems. Those forgotten school workshops, they became little innovation labs. Military garages turned into manufacturing bays. Students who once dreamed of working abroad suddenly said, "Wait a minute, maybe we can build something right here." They weren't trying to impress the world, they were trying to survive, to adapt, to stand up on their own feet. As one young engineer secretly said, "We didn't build these things because we had cash. We built them because no one else was coming to save us. If we waited for permission, we'd still be thirsty and unprotected." Damn, that line hits hard. And it wasn't just about hardware. This was a massive psychological shift. For years, Africans were fed the idea that real innovation had to come from Europe, America, or Asia. That high-tech machines must be imported, rented, licensed, or copied. Burkina Faso took that entire mindset and smashed it to pieces. Boom, gone. But here's the twist. When the story finally reached Western policy circles, the reaction wasn't excitement. No, it was confusion. Some international analysts literally didn't believe the reports at first. Like, wait, Burkina Faso built what? And without us? The silence was louder than applause. Western media, which normally loves a dramatic African headline, barely mentioned it. Their reaction said everything. This wasn't the Africa they were used to covering. This wasn't disaster. This wasn't charity. This was capability. This was independence. And honestly, that made some people uncomfortable. Meanwhile, Africa itself went wild. From Nairobi to Accra, students were reposting the prototypes saying, "Why not us?" Hashtags popped up like #AfricaBuilds and #TroreTech. Engineers across the continent were DMing Burkinabe innovators asking for blueprints, asking for collabs, asking how they pulled this off. In many African cities, people walked around smiling like, "Yo, we can actually do this ourselves." And that feeling? That's priceless. It's the kind of motivation that textbooks can't teach. One Nigerian journalist summed it up with a perfect punchline. "This is more than a win for Burkina Faso. This is a wake-up call for the whole continent. No more excuses." President Traore didn't brag about the reaction. He didn't need to. The success of his people said it all. Africa's progress will not come from waiting for approval. It'll come from building with what's already here. But the real magic of this story isn't in the factories or the tech. It's in how these inventions started transforming everyday life across Burkina Faso. The impact on villages, farmers, schools, and soldiers. That's where things get emotional. And you're about to see exactly what changed on the ground. Innovation only matters when it stops being a headline and starts touching real people's lives. And that's exactly what's happening across Burkina Faso. These new technologies aren't sitting in fancy glass displays or government offices. They're out in the dirt, in the villages, in the schools, in the fields, and even on the front lines. The change is real, and honestly, it's kind of beautiful. Let's start with water, because in a country hit by drought, water isn't just a resource, it's survival. For years, families walked miles under the blazing Sahel sun just to fill a bucket from wells that were often unreliable or dirty. Kids missed school. Mothers spent half their day fetching water instead of earning a living or resting. It was a cycle that kept communities stuck. But now, those salt to freshwater purification units are straight up lifesavers. They're popping up in rural areas where hope was running dangerously low. Suddenly, people who once waited hours just for a drop have access to clean, drinkable water right at their doorstep. Teachers report that kids are missing fewer classes because waterborne diseases are dropping. Villagers say the burden has eased. For the first time in a long time, the word tomorrow doesn't sound scary. It sounds promising. Then there's the farming revolution. Imagine standing in a field and hearing a soft buzzing overhead. Not mosquitoes, not helicopters, but drones. Smart drones. These things are like farming superheroes. They plant seeds with surgical precision, sprinkle nutrients exactly where they're needed, and send alerts when the soil starts drying out. And no, these drones aren't some imported toys from Europe or the US. They were built right there in Burkina Faso, shaped by the land, the climate, and the real needs of farmers. Smallholder farms, the backbone of the nation, are finally catching a break. Farmers who once depended on unpredictable rainfall now have eyes in the sky. They're using fewer resources, reducing waste, and harvesting more. For many families, these drones mean the difference between surviving and thriving. They're not high-tech gadgets anymore. They're the new guardians of food security. But if one invention turned heads the most, it's the electric military truck. When it rolled through the streets of Ouagadougou for the first time, the crowd went absolutely nuts. People weren't shouting because it was electric. They were cheering because it was theirs, built by their engineers, created with their hands, protected by their own technology. That moment hit differently. For decades, Burkina Faso relied on donated equipment, second-hand vehicles, and foreign military aid. Suddenly, seeing their own machine, silent, powerful, rugged, modern, felt like a whole new identity. A young soldier said, "This truck is more than a vehicle. It's proof that we're not just standing up. We're moving forward." You can't buy that feeling anywhere. And here's the ripple effect nobody expected. Schools and universities are overflowing with students rushing into engineering, robotics, and applied sciences. Not because they watched some Silicon Valley documentary, but because they saw their own country do it. Workshops are packed. Teachers are inspired. For the first time in years, being an engineer in Burkina Faso feels cool, respected, meaningful. Even in markets and living rooms, the conversation has shifted. People aren't asking, "When will foreign investors help us?" They're asking, "What else can WE build?" That's a whole cultural rebirth right there. But this wave of innovation didn't just move hearts. It shook up politics, power structures, and even international relationships. Something bigger was happening behind the scenes. Something that caught the whole world off guard. If you thought the economic moves of Burkina Faso were bold before, just wait. Because this next chapter feels like the moment in a movie where the hero walks back into the room with a whole new level of confidence. And honestly, oh man, this part makes you feel proud, hyped, and just a little emotional. Because what happens next is not only about paying off debt, it's about proving a point to the whole world. We can stand on our own feet. We don't need permission to rise. After clearing almost $5 billion in debt, Burkina Faso didn't just chill. Oh no, they doubled down. Traore and his leadership team made a move that Western analysts totally didn't expect. They cut back the influence of foreign corporations that had been dipping into the country's natural resources for decades. Gold, cotton, manganese, farmland, resources that had been flowing out to other countries for pennies, were suddenly revalued, renegotiated, and in some cases, taken back under national control. And trust me, that shook boardrooms from Paris to Washington. Ha ha. You could practically hear the excuse me, from miles away. Instead of watching wealth leak out of the country, Traore redirected it back into local industries, cooperatives, and regional alliances. Farmers got better subsidies. Gold miners got better safety. Young entrepreneurs got grants, mentorship, and access to local tech hubs. For the first time in a long time, the average Burkinabe could actually feel a shift, not just on paper or in speeches, but in daily life. One farmer said something like, "For the first time, the government looks like it's working for us, not for someone else." And wow, that hits different. Of course, let's be real. This level of independence doesn't come without challenges. Neighboring countries raised eyebrows. Old allies sent concerned statements. Certain powerful nations whispered about instability, which we all know is code for "you're messing with our business." And media headlines tried to paint Burkina Faso as rebellious, risky, unpredictable. But internally, the country felt more united than ever. Schools started getting funding instead of waiting for foreign NGOs. Hospitals received upgraded equipment. Water systems in rural areas improved. Small towns that had been forgotten for years suddenly had new roads, new lights, and new opportunities. That's what happens when you invest your own money into your own people. The growth becomes real, not borrowed. The youth of Burkina Faso, the heart of the nation, stepped into this new era with pride. You could see it everywhere, in music, in social media, in community projects. And the funniest part, Western commentators kept saying, "This isn't sustainable," while the people of Burkina Faso kept saying, "Watch us." And honestly, watching them rise is incredible. But here's the twist: the biggest shock isn't even political or economic, it's emotional. Because for the first time in generations, people are dreaming again. Not small dreams, but big, wild. Maybe I can build something real dreams. Hope is returning. And that is something no money can buy. But hold on, because the story isn't done. Burkina Faso is about to take a step that nobody saw coming. One that might change the power dynamics of Africa forever. What if I told you Burkina Faso's next move could completely rewrite how African nations negotiate with the world and even shift global power balances? Oh yeah, it gets crazier. Just when everyone thought Burkina Faso had pulled off its biggest surprise, the country made a move that hit the global stage like a thunderclap. And trust me, this one had the world saying, "Wait, what?" Because after paying off nearly $5 billion in debt without Western support, taking control of their resources, and rebuilding national pride, Burkina Faso decided to step into an even bigger arena. They weren't just cleaning their own house. They were about to change the neighborhood. Traore, calm as ever, announced that Burkina Faso would join hands with other West African countries following the same path of independence. Not through the IMF, not through colonial-era agreements, not through foreign scripts that always came with strings attached. Nope, they were forming a new kind of regional alliance built on self-reliance, resource sharing, and shared defense. And brew. That sent shockwaves across the planet. The idea was simple but revolutionary. Why compete when we can unite? Why beg when we can build? Why depend on outsiders when we have each other? Countries like Mali, Niger, and others in the Sahel started aligning, creating a bloc of nations that refused to be intimidated. And let's be honest, the West did not like that, not one bit. Suddenly you could hear the panic in the tone of international statements. Haha. Analysts on TV started using dramatic words like geopolitical shift and emerging power structure. Meanwhile, Africans were like, finally, something that's ours. This wasn't just politics. This was healing after decades of exploitation. The alliance meant shared security, shared economic plans, and shared control over natural resources. It meant negotiating with global powers as a team instead of as isolated, pressured nations. And the most beautiful part, it meant hope, not the fragile hope of borrowed loans, but the strong hope of unity. As this new chapter unfolded, Burkina Faso began investing heavily in internal talent. Engineers, teachers, scientists, young innovators who had the skills and passion to change the country from inside out. Traore's message to the youth was clear. You are the future. You are the value. You are the power. And oh man, you could really feel it. You could feel the excitement in the streets, in the markets, in the voices of people who once felt forgotten. You could feel the electric energy of transformation, the kind that doesn't fade after the cameras leave. Of course, the journey won't be perfect. There will be challenges, mistakes, and moments where the world tries to push back hard. But Burkina Faso isn't the same country it was years ago. This time, they're walking with their heads high, their future in their hands, and a sense of pride that no debt collector can take away. This isn't just about paying off billions. It's about reclaiming dignity, reclaiming identity, reclaiming destiny. Burkina Faso has shown that a nation doesn't need to be big to be powerful, and it doesn't need to be rich to be respected. What it needs is courage, and oh boy, they showed the world what courage looks like. And maybe, just maybe, this is the spark that lights a fire across the entire continent. So now the real question is, if Burkina Faso can shock the world like this, who's going to be the next African nation to flip the script? Because trust me, the story of African power is just getting started.